Good evening, and thank you for having me and for giving me the opportunity to participate. I will speak on the not only the British Parliament attempts, but also will focus on how Saudi Arabia uses the sports whitewashing in order to whitewash its violations and abuses. Also, I will speak about how some politicians were threatened and blackmailed, and also human rights organizations. I will speak first about, according to me, it was the worst event in this year, in 12 March, when Saudi Arabia had executed 81 persons. Many of them were from the eastern region. Execution was because they have protested against the royal family. This was a dark day in the history of Saudi Arabia. This is a historical day because in one day, 81 persons were actually executed. It's the worst day ever in the executions history. What I want to say here, how would such a day and what are the political consequences after this day? First of all, that Boris Johnson has visited Saudi Arabia. It happened after a few days from this execution. Despite there were pressures by the British media from some member of parliament who asked Boris Johnson to not go for this visit. This is a clear message to Mohammed bin Salman and to the royal family that UK can actually ignore such vicious violations for human rights, even though they were massive executions. For all, and after that, the visit happens, and also the war in Ukraine and the petroleum prices were encouraging for the Boris Johnson to not retreat from doing this visit in order to decrease the price of the petroleum. And the UK station is far more important than any other violations which were done by Saudi Arabia. Also, after days of this, the Formula One also a race happened in Saudi Arabia. First of all, it happened in Bahrain. Then the next phase was in Saudi Arabia. Also, this was a very curious date because they were clearly called for stopping this race because only 2 weeks have passed from executing 81 persons. And there was a very clear question to the Formula One management, CEO Stefano. They were questioned by journalists on how would you do such a race, although your business partner has committed such a crime. And the response was very ridiculous, actually. And this is what Saudi hopes, that the aim behind having this Formula One race is giving more legitimacy to the ruler and to its crimes, and show that Saudi Arabia is more open because it's the most important cars race being held in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah city. This is the image which Saudi government wanted to transfer to the people. But what happened was the contrary. The world champion for 7 times in Formula One, Lewis Hamilton, criticized severely Saudi Arabia when he was asked by the journalists, was Formula One administration decision to have the race held in Saudi Arabia right? Hamilton said, I don't feel comfortable here. And I can't say that I feel comfortable, but unfortunately, it's not my decision. And sports took this decision on behalf of us. So Saudi Arabia actually had a very vicious media campaign which were covering the Formula One race. I believe that they were amongst the strongest media campaigns because the violations were really bold. And at the same time, the war against Yemen was still going on. And this was also ridiculous. How can the Formula One administration itself defend its decision in taking or in holding this race in Saudi Arabia, while Saudi Arabia executed 81 persons, war in Yemen was still on, and at the same time, the Formula One administration has actually withdrawn from Russia. So, how can this happen? At the same time, despite that, Saudi Arabia is waging a war against Yemen. The Formula One would actually ignore this fact and approves that Saudi hosts this event. So it becomes very clear here how Western hypocrisy and the multiple standards, dual standards, not only by the Western states and who spoke a lot about human rights standards, but when it comes for real and when the decision has to be taken against states, which they consider as allies, then all of these crimes committed by these rulers can be ignored as if nothing happened. This is point one. Point two, in the UK, and how Saudi Arabia purchased Castle United Football Club, 1 million sterling pound. So here's comes our role, or the important point here for Saudi Arabia. How can Saudi Arabia be a part of the most important sports events, Premier League in UK? Premier League is known as one of the most important contests and protests, not protests, events. Millions of people actually watch this event. How can Saudi Arabia purchase football clubs with such amounts, and then they can decide how the ads for this football club can take control over it? So here we should speak that how these states can, through their money, actually purchase other states, other acquaintances, and when challenged by money, all of these standards which actually would actually fail. So it's not just about doing deals public-wise. Here we shall speak about the politicians' role. I'll go back to your first question, how Saudi Arabia deals with members of parliament in the UK. It uses the weapon of money and arms. Philip Hammond was the Minister of Treasury in UK in Theresa May regime. So he is considered as the second man in the state. Saudi Arabia managed in less than 2 years, was able to purchase the acquaintance of Philip Hammond and to be as one of their advisors. He is an official advisor of Saudi government with a few millions and not billions. A committee actually was held because Philip Hammond was a ministry in a very sensitive position. So before starting or initiating any business, He is a member of Lords Council right now and not the House Parliament. But the Saudi Arabia was able to purchase his equities with a few millions. We always heard how can Gulf countries were able to purchase advisors or ambassadors who used to work at their country, like employees for them. So here we know the previous Bahraini American ambassador in Bahrain. So as for USA, anyone who works in lobbying, so they must declare that they must declare their financial accounts. It appeared that this ambassador is working officially for the Saudi government for a certain salary. So when we speak about these values, these standards, we actually laugh at ourselves. They were able to purchase the sports, the politicians with money. And this is the very difficult reality that we are actually tackling. We should know that the tools, these are the tools used by the other part. We should have further stronger tools. We want to thank Reprieve this year and other NGOs because they played a very big role in unveiling the violations during the period of Formula One, and they managed to turn the happiness of Saudi Arabia into a media nightmare. And I hope that similar steps would be taken, especially the role of the European Saudi organization in unveiling the number of executed persons, during the year, the types of their cases, and the impact of the decisions in Geneva and agencies. I want to conclude here. Probably Saudi Arabia have billions and have a lot of money to buy a lot of acquaintances, but the voice of right is the strongest. No matter what it purchased, the voice of truth is the strongest. If the will of the people are there to challenge these regimes, we will see this regime fall. We saw how Mohammed bin Salman has failed before Jamal Khashoggi, or before Jane Hadlul, who was forced to set her free. These are actually triumphs. So who would say that the international advocacy or pressure doesn't have an impact? I would tell you, look at the people who were set free a year ago, months ago. They are a living witness that pressuring these regimes can actually lead us to reach a result. Please don't give up your tools. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Ahmed. There is a question from the audience here. Probably your final word answered this question, but I'm going to pose it anyway. Do you think that the peoples around the world can contribute to stop the sports whitewashing as Formula One or Mondial? Actually, I have a direct experience in this, and I want to speak about my experience in Bahrain in the Formula One race. This year, before Formula One launched, we tried to communicate with the administration of Formula One as for the Bahrain race, and we have tackled many points. Amongst the sports hypocrisy, we wanted them to clarify why would you withdraw the race from Russia but hold it in Saudi Arabia and keep it in Bahrain, although they are states which are waging war against Yemen? Because if you are saying that you won't hold it in a state which is waging war against another state, we posed this question to them. And of course, we didn't have a response. But we received a letter from one of the political prisoners to Lewis Hamilton. Anyone who would follow Lewis Hamilton, he is the most famous in Formula One because he is the legendary champion. He has won it for 7 times, the title. So the letter came from prisoners, a political prisoner in Bahrain. He wrote it to Lewis Hamilton telling him, we started because of your solidarity attitude with us in Bahrain. We started watching Formula One in Bahrain. And we wrote the name Sir Lewis on our prisoner's uniform, or write the number of his car, 44. The Guardian newspaper actually mentioned this, that prisoners, according to the attitude, solidarity of Lewis with prisoners in Bahrain, the same journalist actually asked Hamilton about this letter, about the political prisoners letter. He said, yes, I did hear it. I never imagined in my life, in a million years, that as a person, I would have such an influence on such people. So also his response was in solidarity. So actually, I believe that the Bahrain race was also a nightmare media campaign, because the world champion was in solidarity with the prisoners and not whitewashing to the host country. And the Formula One administration actually was faced severely by its dual standards. And when we asked how, if the victims can play a role in stopping this, yes. Now we are in the process of a legal complaint against Formula One. A part of them were actually victims of torture in Bahrain. So we started with this legal proceeding complaint against the Formula One, and we hope that these movements or actions would have positive impacts. I hope that I answered this.